Good evening. Welcome to DiversiTV. We're in season 4. I'm your host, Mark Harris. Tonight we'll be talking about a hip-hop perspective with our guest. But first, if you're tuning in to the show for the first time, welcome. If you're an ongoing, growing legion of devoted fans watching on the internet, streaming sometimes, welcome back. DiversiTV's mission is to illuminate everyday diversity issues and give the mic and the camera to those who don't always get it. And to that end, the seasons roughly follow LCC academic terms. This is our 4th season, and it's gone roughly like this. I say roughly because even though we have a set schedule, things basically life is often about change. So April 16th, we usually start out with a Native perspective with the first show, and we did this time. April 23rd, we did an Anglo perspective. April 30th, Africans in America. May 7th, Latino. This week, hip-hop. Next week, we'll be attempting to schedule in, and hopefully successfully. I'm in negotiations with various people, so that's why the schedule gets fluid. People have birthdays or all kinds of personal commitments and wind up having to make other arrangements at the last minute. So the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer questioning, intersexed, transgender, two-spirit perspective. May 28th, disability. June 4th, youth. And June 11th, class. Tonight's subject is hip-hop, and as various we do have a thriving hip-hop scene here locally, and we do have visits from proponents of the hip-hop movement, KRS-One being one of them, and the last several times he's been through, he's talked about the Temple of Hip-Hop, and so from their website, templeofhiphop.org, the lead on the homepage basically talks about KRS-One prepares for the release of his new book, The Gospel of Hip-Hop, wherein he talks about approaching hip-hop spiritually as well as culturally. It outlines a spiritual code of conduct capable of assisting hip-hoppers towards increased health, love, awareness, and wealth. We realized long ago that in order to truly preserve hip-hop, we were going to have to preserve the hip-hop community with an understanding of hip-hop beyond entertainment, says KRS. Also, if you go further in, saying on the link that says I Am Hip-Hop, talks about HEAL, the Human Education Against Lies movement, is a self-construction movement designed to rescue humanity from the most lethal disease facing it, Common Sense Deficiency Syndrome, CSDS. CSDS is the root of the world's social problems: AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, crack addiction, racism, sexism, environmental terrorism, pimpism, and imperialism are all encouraged and supported by CSDS. The objectives of HEAL: heal the minds of the people, especially youth, by providing true facts. Help build reasoning skills needed for human behaviors is needed for human behavior. And also the refinitions instead of definitions. Refinitions or refined definitions are the Temple of Hip-Hop's collection of hip-hop cultural terms and codes designed to protect, preserve, and establish hip-hop as hip-hop's common spirit and raise the self-worth of the true hip-hopper. Other hip-hop organizations may practice a different set of elements and terms. However, the definitions remain the primary teaching tool of the Temple of Hip-Hop. With this body of knowledge, we raise our self-worth as hip-hop cultural specialists. Heady stuff. So the definitions, there's different headings: street entrepreneurialism, street language, street fashion, beatboxing, DJing, graffiti art, MCing, breaking, street knowledge. So our guest tonight is Michael K., also known on his driver's license as Michael Klint. He's a Lane student and Rites of Passage instructor. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you, and glad for you to come on such relatively short notice. Improvisation is a theme of hip-hop as well as jazz, as well as live educational television. Where are you from, and where'd you grow up?
I was actually born in Germany. I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, in the Lakewood neighborhood, kind of out by Fort Lewis.
Okay.
Which kind of tells you my background, military family background. And I finally moved to Eugene in 1992. My mother passed away, and so I came here to move with my father, who they got divorced when I was pretty young, and I had to kind of rebuild my perspective, my cultural perspective, especially once I moved here, especially at that time in the early 90s. And so that was my introduction to Eugene, as well as my introduction to a creator of hip-hop.
Huh. How old were you then?
I was 12. And it's an interesting story how I got introduced to hip-hop in Eugene. Where I grew up, hip-hop wasn't particularly something that you did. It just was. If music was being listened to, if dancing was being done, if there was language or slang or lingo, it was all a reflection of hip-hop culture. But it wasn't until I moved to Eugene in '92, by this time I was 13, the only African-American male that was in my apartment complex, which at that time I hadn't ventured that far out into the town, so I thought he was the only African-American in Eugene.
Period.
Right.
An easy impression to get in this town.
So, you know, he kind of saw that I was a little bit displaced, so he was like, "Can you rap?" I'm like, "Sure, I could," you know. And he basically...
Did you know what he was talking about?
Yeah, I knew what he was talking about. I mean, on the playground, which is the age I was at, that's pretty much my experience with the playground. And, you know, we'd always rap on the playground, but we just didn't know we were doing anything special, whether we were freestyling or we were, you know, repeating songs that we heard and whatnot. It wasn't something we thought about or tried to do. And here he is telling me, "Is this something that you would like to try to do?"
Okay.
And I said, "Sure." So he said, "Hey, I'm going to have my friend help you write a rhyme, and if you can memorize it, we have a show in a couple of weeks at the Sheldon Community Center, and we'll give you a shot." And of course, he was older. He was in his probably mid-20s. And I took the challenge. I memorized the rhyme, and I performed. The little guy amongst all the high school kids, and I'd never heard my voice on a microphone, real high-pitched. So I gave it a shot. I closed my eyes and just got through that 16 bars. And that's kind of been my adventure, the starting point of this hip-hop adventure for me.
So you just threw out a lot of stuff in there. So if you had the single guy, the single black person, other black person in your apartment complex is kind of like your introduction, right? Or the only black person in Eugene, so you thought. And so you're still identifying hip-hop / rap as a African-American black phenomenon. Is there a distinction made between hip-hop and rap? Is there a difference? In your understanding?
In my understanding, it's sort of like hip-hop is the culture, and rap is the language.
Okay.
And so what we know as rap traditionally today is really what you're talking about is the rhythms, the tones, the tempos. In which case, if you go back and you trace even African-American cinema in the 70s, some of the different musical styles and whatnot, James Brown, from my understanding, that's kind of considered rapping too, because you know we're bouncing up the lingo. Our words are bouncing a little bit more, and we're putting a little bit of twist on the accent and the slangs, and trying to outwit each other with funky, smooth speech. And eventually that got integrated into the beat and so on and so forth. So rapping was really the style of speaking, the language. And hip-hop is the culture that language grew up into. Really specifically when you talk about hip-hop, although you can trace it all the way back, in the context that it was in, you're really talking about the beat. and how that beat made people dance, and the rhythm of their speech over top of the beat, because that's really what it was speech at first. It was just, they had a party, people were dancing, person would grab the microphone and do a slick, bouncy talk over the top to get the attention of the people, to communicate that and set the atmosphere for the party. And so it's really the style of dancing, it's really the atmosphere, and the people that were a part of that atmosphere tended to have a certain style of dress, a certain attitude of walk, and the way that their body language spoke to the rest of the community. That's really what I think of as hip-hop.
Okay. And so you saw local examples of that as well as media portrayals of that too?
Yeah, what was real interesting for me personally, being a hip-hop artist that was introduced to the art form and the language in the early 90s, is that there was such a diversity. Even when I was younger, you know, I'd have a little cough and I'd be excited to be able to stay home from school because I could watch Rap City, which came on BET when it was still black owned. And I remember it came on for that hour or two, and I always missed it because I was at school, so I got to see it, and I'd look on, and 1 minute you had De La Soul, and the next minute you had Ice-T, the next minute you had Tribe Called Quest, then you had Arrested Development, then you had X-Clan, and you got exposed to all of these different forms of the expression. It was all hip-hop, but it took on different life forms, different speech, different rhythm, different experiences. Everything wasn't all Ice Cube, original gangster, you know, talking about shooting police and stuff. It wasn't all Arrested Development, talking about the South experience and coming out of a blues tradition and a tradition of Southern poverty, but with an Afrocentric spirit to try to lift and educate the hip-hop community about what it means to be African.
Right. Africa's inside me, etc.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I was exposed to such a diversity that even though it was mainstream or whatever, it was what I was seeing on the TV, it still had such an element of authentic culture, and it wasn't something that was, you know, worldwide popular Sprite commercials and stuff like that. So although it had already probably gone through 20 years of commercialization, it still retained an authentic cultural spirit that still had some of its innocence left in it.
I think that's one of the things, you know, that, well, the tempo of hip-hop, and that's what KRS speaks to, is basically talking about those differences, describing hip-hop as a culture, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, that rap is the language or the musical expression that that grew out of the culture, starting with you know, an urban or even a rural African American experience, and then branching beyond that, and we'll get into a little later, you know, some of his, you know, more international and more global visions. But clearly, you know, if we, from referencing the website, you know, it seems to be more than just an entertainment form, but also a political statement, a cultural stance. You know, when you were referencing, for example, Arrested Development, and they talk about, you know, not eating, eat healthy to avoid the cancer, you know, wearing my dreadlocks and dashiki, you know, Africa is inside me, et cetera, you know, but still talking about the old history, you know, lynchings, what it's like to grow up in Tennessee, you know, and various other groups. So, you know, so you feel like you've been a hip-hop artist since you were 12. So who or what and who are your influences besides the people you've mentioned?
Well, like I said, I feel like the people that I mentioned and just the experience of growing, I mean, I grew up in a pretty diverse school already. And in Tacoma, Washington. You know, it's kind of where it was an actual neighborhood. And when I mean neighborhood, there were boundaries to that neighborhood. That was one thing interesting about moving to Eugene, is that although you had neighborhoods, there were always main streets cutting through every which way. And there was, it was not really contained. You don't know exactly where the neighborhood ends because it just blends into the next one. You know, in my neighborhood, it was don't go past those railroad tracks, don't go past the hill, don't go past the school, so on and so forth. So I was in there. And surrounding that neighborhood, you had project apartments. You would have an Asian community where all the stores are Asian, and the billboards, the sign, everything is Asian. The apartments were predominantly Asian. You had, predominantly white neighborhoods. In this small kind of span of area, you had all of these different classes and cultures of people that all funneled into the same elementary school. And so I had friends that would listen to Guns N' Roses, and I would have friends whose older brother was a gangbanger and had all us thinking that we were pretty tough, and so, like I said, hip hop was just a part of that experience. By the time that
did everybody participate in that experience?
I think at that point, honestly, I don't think that we really knew the difference totally between each other's experience because they were all happening simultaneously.
Okay, all right.
And it wasn't until, like I said, I moved to Eugene where I realized that there was really actually a distinction between people's experiences and that they were separate.
Yeah.
And so at that point, my influences to being a hip-hop artist were those that I was directly with, that I was directly writing rhymes with and spending time with. And, taking little karaoke machines that were broken and taking them into a bedroom at 3 o'clock in the morning with no furniture and having 3 guys up against the wall just passing the little mic on the karaoke machine for hours with a tape that we'd loop, find a beat, and hit record on the tape, and then hit pause and make our own tape. And so,
primitive mixing machine
with
a broken karaoke machine. Okay.
And that was the influence. It was the experience. It was the people we were around. Now, that's not to say I didn't enjoy listening to tune into what other people were doing, but that's what hip-hop was about, was finding your identity, your voice. And if I heard something that I liked, it wasn't, I want to do what they're doing. I want to do like them. It was, okay, I got to figure out more of me so that the higher me rapping can hold up against the higher them rapping.
Yeah. I want to go back on something you touched on to illuminate that, because that's what we do here on DiversiTV. Okay. So you come from Tacoma, all right, where you talked about a neighborhood, and you use that particular inflection that African Americans use when we say the neighborhood, like as in the hood, and you made that distinction which is much less clear in a place like Eugene, where you might have sections of the city, but whether they're a neighborhood beyond whether you know the people across the street or the people on either side of you, the people the other block, you're not that close with them. And so the class distinctions become interesting, for example, whether you're south of 18th or north of 18th or in North Eugene or the South Hills or Whitaker or whatever. I mean, there are, neighborhoods we speak of in that sense, but not in the sense that you're talking about, where you have, all these different experiences funneled into the elementary school. So that's definitely an urban experience, and Eugene is a metro experience. So definitely the hip-hop crucible, is there because you've got this funky, as your word, cultural stew going on. So let me ask you something. Was there music programs in your school?
To my memory, I remember singing "Learn to Lean on Me" in a little choir.
Okay.
Learn a few notes on a piccolo flute or something like that.
A recorder. Yeah.
But nothing real serious that I can remember.
Okay, this is like in elementary school and okay,
and in junior high.
In junior high. Okay, so was there a band in junior high?
I think there was. I didn't know anybody that played in the band though.
Okay, so the reason I asked that is once upon a time in the school system, I remember in 4th grade, even in my South Central LA, Normandy Avenue School, like on Normandy Avenue in Vernon, right? I learned to play trumpet. That was my first instrument, a trumpet, and I mean, Dad and Mom played Miles Davis and, Freddie Hubbard and stuff like that, but, I was learning trumpet, because it was just, you had to learn an instrument, so trumpet, and then, Mom, piano, et cetera, and those programs were in the schools. And so, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, I mean, this is definitely dating me, but, when there was music instruction in the schools, and it wasn't considered a frill, it was a necessity. Because in my elementary school, I definitely was not going to be playing trumpet in the school band. There wasn't really a school band per se in elementary school. In middle school, there would be. You could learn marching band or whatever, but, I wasn't into that by that time. But, you definitely had, and you definitely were encouraged outside of your home to play music and have music instruction. And I have to say this even as an educator, with the deliberate destruction of the schools, music programs were eliminated, right? So even, when Chuck D came here because I remember you were there, right? And I'm old enough to remember why this was so, and I remember different things. So what y'all consider normal, right, is we're, considering turntables instruments, right? So wait a minute, how is a turntable an instrument, besides scratching, right? So, I'm a musician, so I learned, like music, like notes, like the rhythm, like keys, like circle of fifths, like all that kind of chord structures, harmony, melody, all the technical stuff of music, right? So if you sang, what pitch do you sing on? If you play a recorder, you can follow the notes. You could read music, right? But karaoke machine, so like what you're doing, primitive mixer. Now you can do that on a computer because I've been to your house and I've seen that setup, right? So you know what I'm talking about. The primitive, using cassette tapes and singing into the mic on top of it, recording, et cetera, primitive mixer, is basically an extension of using turntables as percussion instruments because you ain't got no music program to teach you the technical stuff, so you improvise. You improvise, and so that's part of what comes from that. And so then now people think, well, I ask somebody what's their instrument, and they say turntable. Okay, all right. So what's the rhythm you're sampling? Well, they can't answer that, but even though they know it's a funky beat or whatever, they think so. When you talk about, the influences, where you've had to synthesize your own music instruction, and your influences are informed like that. What do you think then are the strengths of hip hop culture?
I think that the strengths then are an uninhibited ability to communicate and express who you are, what your ideas are, what your feelings are, what your experience is. And I think that it's always been that. That's what it started as. And it's interesting if you go back and trace the history of hip-hop to see that change, to see somebody be able to say, you know what, we ain't got no money. I got beat up again just for going outside on the front porch to get some fresh air. Somebody threw an apple at me and busted me in my eye. There's nothing good about living around here. But somehow we plugged these speakers in and we ended up having a good party. Wow, this feels good. And that constant experimentation, getting on the mic, wow, people are smiling when I'm on the mic. They like this. That's making the party better. Okay, what else can I do? And then somebody else, oh, he did that. Okay, what else can I do? With the turntables, it was started with one scratch. What else can it do? Another one. It was that constant driving force of what else can it do? What else can it do? So it would go from party lyrics to people like Rakim and KRS-One and Public Enemy like, okay, it can do that, it can get the party hype. Well, can it facilitate a parade of African Americans marching in Brooklyn with anti-police signs? Wow, it could do that. Matter of fact, they're looking at us now. They can hear it. So to see the ability to take that experience and to communicate it to the rest of the world, to see them respond, and then to say, what else can it do? What else can it do? I'm going to go ahead and segue into the weakness then. That's the weakness as well. What else can it do? And that what else can it do turned into what else can I get? What else can I get? What else can I get? And I think that that's really the track we're on right now, is what else can I do to get?
It seems like decidedly materialistic bent there. Becomes about the bling and the record deal, and without necessarily, dare I say it, financial literacy. Because clearly, when if we look at, for example, the Temple of Hip Hop website as an attempt to maintain a cultural focus that's not focused on the BET of the world. Like, you made the comment, because that has been the comment of, well, BET, got sold, to basically white owners, and the focus got even less community-centered and more, crass, more gangster, more what can I get, instead of, what else can it do, and what else can we do politically, what else can we do, in terms of social change, what else can we do spiritually, culturally, what else can we be?
Yeah, I think that it was a big trap. It was a big trap that was stepped into. And I'm not going to say that it's all that. I'm not going to say that it's all materialistic. But I think that there's a certain level that even a lot of socially conscious, which I think is when I hear the word conscious rap, it's a term that's used quite loosely these days. Basically, if it's not mainstream, or if it's not talking about material things, then usually it's deemed as conscious rap. But when I think of consciousness, I think of being aware of what's going on, being aware of how it got there, and to be able to anticipate where it's going. To me, that's awareness. That's consciousness. And a lot of people that I've seen deemed as conscious rappers, even when I've watched documentaries of behind the scenes, or when you really peer into the lyrics fairly deeply, I still feel like in a lot of cases there's a lack of awareness. There's a lack of the overall context, and it's more of, I decided I didn't like this, or I decided I didn't want to go that route. If for example, if you have on MTV, and I've seen this a lot, on MTV, you got the video, it's recycled, it's got the booty dancers, it's got the, all the fancy cars, and, the whole shebang that you see a lot, people throwing up money, and then it'll come on again and again and again and again and again, and it just replicates.
In heavy rotation, right. So as if it's advertising, or if it's a commercial.
Exactly.
And it is a commercial.
Exactly. And on the flip side, then you'll have the conscious response to that, which is, I can't stand booty dancers in the videos. I can't stand cars. I can't stand guys that floss around with money. I can't stand this. I can't stand this. This is terrible. I don't like this. I don't like that.
In less rotation.
Rotation.
And then they're labeled as haters.
Right. So...
targets of the Dolores, and so all of them get targeted by the Dolores Tuckers of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so I don't want to go to an extremely radically pessimistic level, which it kind of sounds like I'm going, but I think the point that I'm trying to highlight...
Well, criticism from within the culture is valid.
I guess the point that I'm trying to highlight is that you have these both extremes, in which case they're reflecting how they feel about the system, or what they want to get out of it, or what they refuse to get out, who they are, or who they're going to pretend to be, or who they don't want to be, or who they don't want to pretend to be. but the root is not being addressed.
Yeah.
The root of it, the anticipation, the tracing back the root, the things that I would say make up consciousness and awareness.
Right.
How did we get here? Where is it going from here? And who am I in the context of that? And how does my experience relate to it? How can it contribute to it? How can it change it? How am I willing to accept it as it is? If not, what does that mean for my life?
Right.
All of these things that I would say are the consciousness of the culture that is dying.
Mm. So which culture do you see as dying? Though that's obvious, but let's illuminate that for a second.
The hip-hop culture, the culture that formed out of a need to have some confidence, to have validation, a need for expression, to speak ideas. A spirit burst out of that said, wow, this language, people are listening to it. We got to say something. And the voice began to be heard, and it began to get louder. And then I don't know exactly who or what or exactly how, but something grabbed a hold of it and started suppressing it and started remolding it and reshaping it and putting it in a cage to self-destruct so that it could die. And not only did they do that, but they put it in a cage, and as it was dying, started making money off of it. And they didn't want it to live because they didn't like the voice that caged bird could sing, and yet they knew that they could milk it for as long as they wanted. And at any time, when the time came, because they already had the bird caged, they could pull the plug. They could get rid of it. And right now, people say that it's here to stay.
Well, Quincy Jones was saying that.
But in
the 90s. Early 90s.
Yeah.
Right?
But in what form is it here to stay?
Okay. So what you identified as both its strength and its weakness. So let me make sure. It's the counselor in me reflecting back. Okay. So one, the strength is that they're able to look back, right, and have a historical perspective. However far back that is, and then carry that into the future. Talk about current conditions and say things have got to change. Right. That's a positive. But anytime you have a vital expression, and that's also part of the history, because it's almost predictable what you were saying, that it would begin to die, it would begin to use one of those 13-cent words, be commodified, turned into a product, and certain aspects of it, especially if you don't own the media that you're transmitting in, if you don't own the label, if you don't own the record company, whatever, they're going to do what sells, and they're going to define what sells, so that the conscious rappers, don't get picked up beyond a first or second album, and the booty, Maybach, Cristal, Diddy, etc., Diddy and Jay-Z going to Vegas, throwing out piles of hundreds into the crowd, etc., $1,500, $3,000 suits, cigars, etc., private room in the club. Okay, so, not to be a hater, but just, noticing, okay, Public Enemy to the Flavor of Love. Okay, and does the Flavor of Love talk about, like what we're saying on the Temple of Hip Hop? Do you know the infection status of, these partners? Do these people, these women vying for the love of Flavor Flav? It's like, okay, what is their intellectual level? Or is that just me, the college professor, going, wait a minute, what is this? I know I'm going to get some grief from certain quarters, but I got to say this because, it's the valid criticism, right? KRS, whose mind I like immensely in terms of, even though I have only a few of his albums, he's literate, he's read. The fact that he's come out with a book, great. Okay, you've read, you've written, right? Good. Now, one time when he came through here, we were trying to get him up here. The concert itself didn't happen, or rather, the lecture itself didn't happen that time. One of his entourage, said, well, KRS and I were talking about, the books that we've read in common, Chancellor Williams' Destruction of Black Civilization, They Came Before Columbus by Vance Sertima, Lerone Bennett's Before the Mayflower, Kwame Ture's writings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, when KRS was out of the room, I asked, this guy who said he was his road manager, well, what have you read? And he said, and I quote, "I'm a rapper, not a reader." I'm going, wait a minute. You just heard the teacher talk about the books that he's read, and you're a part of his entourage, and you're not a reader? Maybe that doesn't reflect on the teacher. Maybe that reflects on, the public school system and lack of literacy, musical literacy, cultural literacy. Part of what hip-hop culture has done is absorbed the ahistorical, that is, the against history, leanings of America, because it has grown up now in an American context, and where we don't look back very far. We don't examine the conditions that have created us, and look back far enough, except, in the few people that talk about, ancient Africa or, the various social movements and the conscious movements, and, okay, how are we going to be those leaders? How are we going to be literate, and how are we going to write and train ourselves? I don't necessarily see that, and that's part of the weakness there.
I think that's a huge part of the weakness is that the language and the culture, I suppose you could say, became a distraction. I think it started as a vehicle to progress and to communicate the way to progress to each other. Yeah. And I don't want to, I'm not saying that all of this kind of rap is bad and all this kind of rap is good. That all rap needs to be about change and positivity, and there needs to be nothing else. I think that that's one of the beauties of hip-hop is its ability to be diverse. Yeah. And its history of being diverse. Yeah. But the problem is when you take that that diverse array of artists, sounds, and different twists on the culture, and you pluck one out and you begin to clone it, and then you lock up all of the rest, that's not going to be a vehicle to progression.
Lock out, yeah.
That's not going to be. So I'm not saying all the booty stuff is, even though I do think, I won't even go there.
Yeah, right, let's not go there.
But I'm not saying get rid of all them and replace them with all them, because that's the same part of the problem. Right. We don't need clones. Right. But what we do need is people that have the ability to self-reflect. Yeah. The ability to be able to excel and to introduce discipline in other areas of their life besides rap. If everything in their life is based around the outfit and the rap and whatever the next concert is and, whatever it is.
And party, the next party.
What's going to be communicated through not anything that's going to progress. Right. And so I think that that's the period in the culture where we're at, is a period of stepping back, self-reflecting, asking those questions. And I think that there has to be a willingness for the individuals to begin to train again. And because right now we've been focusing on rappers. Mm-hmm. But what sustains the rapper is the listener. Right. And the listeners aren't making any demands to hear something either. Right. The listeners aren't influencing the artist to have to self-reflect and to have to retrain. And there's no accountability anywhere, self or from the community at large. And all of these things, I'm not saying that there's a magic answer. All I'm saying is that these are the things that I think need to come to the table in conversations like this. They need to be talked about everywhere. in all contexts, from people inside the culture and outside, those who just listen and those who produce it.
Yeah. So, a friend of mine, actually one of the people on my master's committee, once said, magic is the focus of intention through an appropriate belief system. Okay? So you're an artist. Okay? You produce CDs, you've done mixes, you've done rap, you've taught that, right? And currently, you know, you're on a fast from listening. Okay? I mean, I think that's a really good thing that you've said. Like, the listeners, you know, have been passive. They're not influencing the artist. You, as part of what and I have to say this, part of your artistic integrity, taking a break from listening to whatever is there. And, you know, tell us about that. Why are you doing that? Why did you do that? Because I thought that was pretty fascinating when you talked about that yesterday.
You know, the main, at the core of it, it's spiritual. And without having to go into exactly what that means, that is the motivation to do it.
Well, you could talk about what it means to you.
What it means to me is first of all, just living in the world today. We take in a lot of junk, you know, from it's food.
Yeah.
And I think that we already know, obviously, food is what you eat, and that within itself introduces a lot of junk the way that we eat today.
Right.
But your mind and your spirit has food as well, and
needs food. Yeah.
And needs food. And I tend to believe that the mind and the body follow the spirit. And if the spirit isn't fed well, if it's empty, then the mind and the body will follow. So then once we take...
Being empty.
Yeah. And so then if you jump up to the mind and you think what we feed it and how much we feed it. You know, I see people with their headphones on a lot, and I kind of always creep in a little bit, being nosy to see what they're listening to, especially on the bus, because you're right there and you can kind of listen. And I see people just nodding out, and I listen to the lyrics and the words and the vibrations and everything that's just going in, and the mind is eating it and eating it. And I'm tired of the excuse, oh, why do you like that? Oh, because the beat. Oh, because it's got a catchy hook.
Right.
I don't really believe in what they're saying, but I still like the way it sounds.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter if you believe what they're saying or not.
It's programming you.
It is. You're eating it.
Right, you're
it's
eating
becoming you.
Right.
You know?
And it could be junk food, and you just like it because it has a... That's like eating, you know, bags and bags of Doritos or, you know, drinking cases of beer because you like the commercials.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and the same thing with the television. You know, you got 250 channels and stuff, and you're just surfing through it, and you're just bombarding your mind with all of these images and these ideas and these products and these influences. Consume more, eat this, drink that, drive this, buy this, do that. And I think there's a point where for the spirit, for the mind, and for the body, you got to cut it off.
Right.
You know, it's sort of like a house. If you live in a dirty house for so long, it doesn't bother you. And, you know, if you've ever been in that house and it's got a stench in it, you don't even smell it.
You don't notice the
until
stench,
you
until
leave
you go out
the house
and come in and
get some fresh air,
Right.
and then you come back in
Right.
and you realize, this stinks in here. I got to clean this up.
Yeah.
And because you're out of the house, you know, the dirty clothes hanging over the side of the couches and all the stuff piled up on the counters that you tuned out, and you go back in and you get to see the openness of the air and breathe the fresh air, and you go back in, all of a sudden you're pinpointing all of the trash containers and the dirty laundry, and then you have a clear mind to be able to say, this needs to be cleaned up. This needs to be cleaned up. This stinks. I don't want to live like this. And on the flip side, if you do take care of your house, you still go outside of it and you come back in and you're like, I got a clean house. It smells great in here. This is where I want to live. And therefore, I don't want to let junk enter into my house.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced a clean house and I've experienced a dirty house. And I like a clean house better. But I would never understand that unless I left the house. So,
okay. So that's food for thought. fact, a lot. So let me segue to this. KRS once posed the question, what if hip-hop were the seeds of a new civilization? And if it were the seeds of a new civilization, what would that civilization look like? So he thought it would be like international, beyond national borders, beyond borders of race, gender, sexual orientation, class. Of course, my snide remark would be, okay, who would take out the garbage? Who would run the sewer system? That's me. But, you think about, okay, you're coming out of this fast, and, usually coming out of a fast, you become, creative because you notice the house is dirty. You got to clean it up. Now, America's house is dirty, right? And also, the world, is dirty. And so what do you do in terms of looking at how do you clean that up? How does hip-hop, retain its vitality, become a source and a force for change, and actually remain viable without getting commodified? I mean, because it will get commodified, and how do you bring that into your daily life so that you become that force for change? You personally. Or if you want to answer that globally, you can do that too.
I think that because hip-hop is a culture, and a culture involves people, not just a person, it involves people. And they say the hip-hop community, which obviously a community takes people. But I think that for me, personally, I approach it by doing just like that. The fast, unplugging, by reading, by feeding my mind with new ideas for whatever interests me, and that I think is healthy. I don't think everybody needs to read the same books that I'm reading or have the same ideas.
What are you reading?
What am I reading? Right now for school, I'm reading Quiet on the Western Front, which is a World War I book. Reading Honor's Reward by John Bevere, which is talks about biblical principles of honor and what the heavenly rewards of that are. I'm reading a book called The Shack, which is a real interesting book. I can't remember the author's name, but it actually takes place in outside of Portland, which is kind of nice. It's a Northwest. It's a fiction novel, but it's got real soul-provoking ideas in it. And that's really, I'm kind of teeter-tottering between those right now.
But hey, you are reading. So hey, at least one hip-hop artist, and among others, does read. So then back to the question, okay, so what do you, when coming out of your fast, then what direction do you go in, or will you go in personally? And then hip-hop goes in.
What do I go in? I think for one, it starts in my lab. When I go back to the drawing board, constantly assessing, what am I going to communicate? Who am I? What needs to change? What's okay?
Yeah.
And to be able to express both of those, even in my rhymes. Everything's not all good. This is where I'm broken. This is what I've learned, so on and so forth. To where the music itself is a living reflection of who I am, where I want to go, so on and so forth. So that even if you don't agree with where I'm at and where I'm going, even if you don't like the style or the tone of it, you can at least get inspired to do the same. You can at least say, oh, that's where he's going. Okay, well, where am I going? And I think that people as a whole, they need to unplug for a minute. They need to unplug, and they need to look at the house and realize that there's an addiction going on. Even just the listeners, just to even try to unplug for even just a couple of days, a week maybe, and just see how they feel when they unplug. Turn the TV off, turn the music off, and just see what that feels like. And during that time, ask, so where am I going now? Who am I? Who was I? Who do I want to be? And those things. And I think that if people made the decision to do those things on a regular basis, they wouldn't have to create all the answers. You wouldn't have to have a website that systematically tells you what to do, because you would have insight into what to do. And if multiple people, a community, a culture comes together, each being able to contribute their own insight, I think that naturally harmony and order would come out of that.
Yeah, somebody was telling me about not only were there 10 commandments, but there were also 10 promises. Yeah, so even just the story that, oh, there's more than just commandments. There's, okay, here's what I promise to do for you if you, adhere to that, or here's what, you can live up to. So a community of people, a community of practice, hey, taking a periodic fast from media, tuning into your creative juices, turning into, your home environment, your inner environment, feeding yourself the best, spiritually uplifting, physically uplifting food, and then, because I was listening to what was on your iPod, and you were talking about, oh, well, gospel, jazz, hip-hop. Now, there wasn't any lyrics in that particular track at the point that I was listening to, but it's like, okay, well, this is a musician. I'm a musician. This is a musician, The music is interesting. It's complex. It's, it's saying something by itself without any words, and, and I guess, if it's gospel, right, because, that was the name of the album, it had gospel in it, like, okay, so it's like a spiritual thing. So, when, Chris is talking about the gospel of hip-hop, and trying to set a tone against the commercialism, at least, aspire to this, it could get people thinking.
I think so. I think that it's time for people to change their food, and at the very least, assess what they're dieting on. At least look at it, Yeah. And I think that anybody can do that, and it doesn't have to be this big. I tend to think that people who are more spiritually advanced can have the higher capacity to unplug, even if that means not eating for a period of time to let your body flush out. But everybody at least has the ability to turn off their iPod for a day or two, to get off the internet and to turn off the TV just for a day or two even, and start asking themselves the question, what am I eating and why? And if they go back to the same food because they decide that's what makes their life happy, so be it. But let's stop for a sec and look at what we're eating. And I'm saying that because that's what I'm doing, and I think that I'm confident to recommend that to other people for what it's doing for me.
Well, yeah, because it's worked, and you can say that. I just myself came off of 11 days of greens, right? So what I immediately got in touch with was looking at how much of my diet is like junk. Is pure junk. If it isn't alive, why are you bothering with it? I got immediate feedback in the form of elevated blood sugar that this wasn't good. And while I was on greens, my sugar were in normal the entire time. I also went off coffee, so it's like, oh, I had energy, and still have energy, so I'm still off coffee. So, right, taking a periodic fast from different things is a good idea. So. In the remaining time that we have, somewhere less than 5 minutes, but more than 2, what do you think the future of hip-hop is?
I think it depends on where it goes from here. I think that if it continues this way, I think that there's going to be something drastic that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And not to mention just, I really do believe, I remember when people were trying to attack some of the mainstream artists and saying, you're the ones that are causing suicide and causing people to do this and that. And the rebuttal was, no, we're not doing that. The parents are doing that. Don't blame us for it.
Yeah.
I tend to believe that the content in the music fuels people's emotions. That if there's a seed of somebody that's thinking about doing something, the music is going to feed it and enhance it. It doesn't cause it, but it helps it.
Yeah.
And if it continues like this, then I think that there's going to be even a bigger self-destructive spirit in the culture. And, everything from more AIDS to more pregnancies to more, people just wanting to go out and fight and so on and so forth. And I think that on the flip side of that, like the situation that we saw with the person that called somebody in the women's NBA nappy-headed, you know, whatever.
Nappy-head hoe, right? Don Imus, right?
The immediate response was, "But look what the rappers are saying."
Look at what the rappers are saying. Yeah.
And so they already have their ammunition because they're in control of it.
Right.
So as soon as they decide they're done with it, then then this lifeline that people think is feeding them, they're going to plug it.
Right.
And where are they going to do then?
Right.
Where it could be in the future, I think, if people start self-reflecting and start taking the art and the culture out of that mainstream and start becoming more intimate with it personally. The music that you listen to are the ones that you get it from the artist directly, that you can communicate with, that you go ahead and, you know, buy it for $10 on iTunes, not because you saw a commercial, but because you like what they're saying.
Right.
You know,
right.
For it to be more personal and intimate, then the future could be, I think, unity, connection, community, a stream to communicate ideas and to help build people.
A more personal and, if you were a conscious connection.
Yes, I would use that. And like I said, there are different characters, so everything doesn't all have to be about flowers and birds and and you can't say that or not, you can't say this. I'm not saying that at all. But at least we would be intentional about our relationship with the music, the artist, the culture, and not just at the mercy of the bombardment.
Right. I want to thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. If you like what you've heard, we request feedback, and email us at liveclass@lanecc.edu. This has been DiversiTV. My guest has been Michael K. Tune in next week. Until then, stay strong.